Welcome to 6 Million Seeds. I'm Meryl Fury.
And I'm Carrie Bruno. We are healthcare professionals and co-creators of this podcast.
Today's episode of 6 Million Seeds is brought to you by the Beauty of Forests. Welcome to 6 Million Seeds. My name is Meryl Fury.
And I'm Carrie Bruno.
And today we have the absolute pleasure and honor of interviewing Dr. T. Colin Campbell and his daughter, Dr. LeAnne Campbell.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So glad you can be here with us today. We'll start with introductions and then we'll get right into the interview. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right. So Dr. T. Colin Campbell has been dedicated to the science of human health for more than 60 years. His primary focus is on the association between diet and disease, particularly cancer. Although largely known for the China study, one of the most comprehensive studies of health and nutrition ever conducted, and recognized by the New York Times as the Grand Prix of epidemiology, Dr. Campbell's profound impact also includes extensive involvement in education, public policy, and laboratory research. In order to synthesize the findings of his long and rewarding career and to give back to the public whose lives are threatened by rampant misinformation and special interests, Dr. Campbell co-wrote the China study, Startling Implications for Diet, Weight Loss, and Long-Term Health, which has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 50 foreign languages. He is also the author of the New York Times bestseller Whole, The Low Carb Fraud, and the Future of Nutrition, an insider's look at the science, why we keep getting it wrong and how to start getting it right. Several documentary films feature Dr. Campbell and his research, including Forks Over Knives, Eating You Alive, Food Matters, and Plant Pure Nation. He continues to share evidence-based information on health and nutrition whenever given the opportunity.
Thank you.
Dr. LeAnne Campbell is president of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. She has a PhD in education and over 30 years of experience designing and directing education initiatives, specifically leadership programs, professional development for teachers, conferences, and curriculum development workshops. She lives half the year in the mountains of La Cumbre, Dominican Republic, and in Carborough, North Carolina. She's also president and founder of Global Roots, which is located within the Somos Education Center in the Dominican Republic. Yay, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, thank you.
Great.
All right, so let's jump into some questions. First question is, how did you make the switch from regular standard American diet to all whole food plant-based?
Well, my career starts a long time ago, as you already noted, in the late 1950s in graduate school. And I had come from a farm, milking cows and eating milk, meat, and eggs. I mean, that's who we were. And I did my graduate research, my doctoral dissertation, and in fact, specifically on doing some research promoting the consumption of more animal protein. So that's who I was. That's who everybody was, quite frankly. And then I thereafter took an academic position, had a chance to coordinate a project in the Philippines, feeding malnourished children. And there we were supposed to be giving them more protein. That was supposed to be the solution to that problem. And what I saw there was a bit alarming. In fact, the children consuming, the few children, I should say, the families consuming the most protein like we do in the West, they had a higher risk of getting liver cancer. And that was really odd because that suggested, wait a minute, this thing about animal protein being so important was being challenged for me and anyone else. But I got involved in doing research, set up a laboratory, of course, at that time, with public money, I should say, throughout, and conducted research with lots of students and so forth. And what we learned was that on from the 60s on into the 70s, that that observation was probably true. More protein, more cancer, to be honest about it. And that was pretty provocative, to say the least. And then as I got involved in public policy and public places, I started taking a lot of heat for that and realized that it's not a very popular idea. But in any case, all this was transpiring during the 70s into the late 70s. And at that time, I was fortunate to be married to my wife, Karen's mother.
Or LeAnne's mother.
I mean, yeah, LeAnne's mother, right? But in any case, we had children at that time, and so she would follow closely what I was doing, of course, and the question concerning, what to eat was obviously at the top uppermost in her mind because she was making the meals, and so what I was seeing was we thought we needed to make some changes, and we did. We started making changes in the late 70s. Now, basically eating more salad. That usually meant more chicken salad and tuna salad.
Right.
And so we did it gradually, obviously. And then during the 80s, it gradually changed more. I was getting more and more involved in very public, kinds of activities, National Academy of Science reports and stuff like that. So I was very conscious of the controversy associated with my views, to say the least.
Mm.
And so we kept at it during the 80s, and finally in the early 90s, when the first report of our study in China, big study there, came out, the New York Times called it, lauded it with a big fancy name, the Grand Prix of all epidemiology, then it really started getting public attention. And I then became acquainted with a couple of colleagues who were physicians working with people. And they in turn were showing that maybe certain diseases could be reversed with this kind of diet. They didn't know me at the time, but we made friends, and one thing led to another. They were showing in people what I was seeing in experimental animal settings in the laboratory. It was very exciting because I was working with theory, with basic biochemical information, if you will, that kind of thing, establishing certain basic facts that I'd come to believe. But the fact that they were, in that situation, working with real people, really added some weight, to my own views. And so we completely changed in the early 1990s. Been that way ever since. Might just add one more comment, and that is that I was getting a lot of pushback, and so I was from my own scientific community, which was annoying to say the least. I tried to look past it, but finally my wife Karen says, well, "Why don't you just go out and she didn't say forget the scientific community. Why don't you go out and just write a book for the public?" And so she was the one eventually in the late 90s who was telling me, "Stop complaining, write a book." So essentially, that's what happened, and we got together with our son, our youngest son at the time, who now is a physician doing this kind of work, Tom, and so he helped me a lot in the writing, and that's what was the genesis of the China study. It was her pushing, nagging, if you would, to get me to do that. And Tom's writing that helped so much. So the book came out, and I actually thought in the beginning that this wasn't going to do very well. I had been led to believe by the publishing community, no way, this was not going to sell. I had to do certain things that I didn't want to do. I said, I'm not going to do it. Got together with a small publisher who was willing to take a chance on it. And I was told if we could sell 5,000 to 6,000, maybe 7,000 copies, he'd get his money back.
Uh-huh.
I say it's well over 3 million, probably close to 4 million. So the China study turned out, for me, it was kind of informative because I didn't know in the beginning, had no idea whether some of these ideas would catch on quite like they did. And they did in a big time way. And so obviously our transformation began in the late 70s, as I said. And gradually changed. And by 1990 or so, we were the whole way there. One more thing I just might add, I've taken up too much time, but that's the fact that my wife, Karen, was diagnosed with melanoma.
Mm-hmm.
That was the time. That was a
Oh,
lot.
yeah, that was the early,
That was a lot.
when the China study came out. Yeah, did I say early 90s?
Yeah, that was.
Oh,
a lot.
okay. So, okay, yeah, I meant to say it was in the early 2000 when the China study first came out.
Okay.
And it was, to be specific, it was 2005, that's when it was published. And so she was diagnosed with advanced melanoma, which was a bit of a surprise to us, to say the least. Why? Because we had done fairly well at that point in time, not completely, but we had done pretty good. And so she was advised to, it had become advanced, because it was in the left tissue. Kind of scary. Melanoma is a very bad cancer, to say the least. And so she was advised that she would have her lymph glands removed and also to be treated by chemotherapy. And she said no to both. Those are pretty, I was just sitting there watching her. And so the doctor got upset and said he wouldn't be able to do anything for her in 6 months, but she did. And now here it is all these years later with no evidence of that cancer returning. So that was a big hallmark, I should say, in my journey as well, because I've heard the same kind of thing from other people too, that this whole diet thing is more than just about preventing disease. It's actually, we don't know. I mean, just look at some of Esselstyn Ornish and McDougall's experiences, and now our son too. The idea that the same kind of diet can actually reverse these diseases, and when they're already diagnosed. I mean, that's a dimension that I would say is very challenging. It needs to be very challenging to the medical community.
Mm-hmm.
They always tend to think, we'll prevent it maybe with diet, but maybe not. It's very wishy-washy about that idea, but we'll treat it anyhow if we get it. What this is saying here is, wait a minute, the same diet that prevents is also the diet that reverses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's an exciting concept, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's the rare medical doctor that will actually bring up diet as a treatment modality,
Yeah.
by itself. That's a rare doctor.
So LeAnne, how was the transition to plant-based for you at that time?
Yeah, so I was, like he said, it was in the 70s. It was a slow transition in the late 70s. I was in high school. I graduated from high school in 1984. And right sort of before I graduated, a couple years before that, we stopped having meat as the main entree. And instead, I was more in the kitchen helping my mom prepare the food. So it wasn't necessarily more salads, because we always ate actually a lot of vegetables from the garden. We always had a garden growing up. He had a beautiful garden throughout, my childhood, and my parents, and my mom always froze everything and canned everything. But really what it was that meat was being used more as a sort of flavoring in dishes rather than as a main entree. So for instance, we would have lasagna with just a little teeny bit of the spicy hot sausage, sprinkled in it. We would have scalloped potatoes with maybe one slab of ham in it. And so this transition was really slow. It was more the meat that was taken out. When I left to go to college in '84, they were still having dairy, ice cream and even a little bit of eggs. And I remember coming home from college and, opening the refrigerator and seeing all these plant-based milks, and then seeing like all the different, even soy ice cream. And so it was interesting because we actually then, for me, it was when I graduated from college, they were pretty much, I think, close to being almost, plant-based at that time. They had also taken out the dairy, and that was in the late 80s, 88. But then I ended up working in the Dominican Republic immediately after college. And I was living in a rural clinic rehabilitating malnourished children. And there were some instances that sort of happened when I was living and working there that really made me start questioning sort of like the ethical, I think humanitarian as well, of role of meat in our diet. And looking at, I was also reading a book called A Diet for a Small Planet.
Yes.
And it just really resonated so much with me when I was there. And for lots of different reasons, I just chose at that time, the 2 years that I lived there, that I was going to be 100%, I was going to raise my children too on a plant-based diet. And so whenever I had children, I decided, I'm done with this, no more animal products in the diet. So I came back in the 90s. So that was, yeah.
Yeah, that book, Diet for a Small Planet, touched a lot of us for sure, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that was one of the earliest ones I read as well. That was the one, okay, tell me if I'm right, where they were talking about combining proteins, right? You're
That's
supposed
right.
to eat a
right.
grain
Yeah.
and beans
And I
together.
think she since then has corrected that a little
Yeah.
bit and talked more about just, just plant-based proteins, a variety of plant-based.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a chance to meet Frances Moore LePay, who wrote the
Yes.
book.
Yes.
Also, her daughter, who was at the time just finishing high school. And they told me, in fact, I heard Frances tell this from the stage about the fact that the combining proteins she realized was not important. So she reversed her stand on that.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, that would make it easier on us. I remember many a day feeling like, oh my gosh, I ate the beans without the rice. Oh my gosh. Oh no, what's going to happen now? You know, but
Not necessary.
yeah.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about, okay, so you were in the Dominican Republic, you had this greater realization about animal products and the impact it has on people's health and ecology and societies and things like that. And then you decided that when you were going to have, were going to create a family, that you would have your children, you would raise them all plant-based. Were your pregnancies plant-based also?
They were 100%. I remember with my second child, I had just had a humongous lunch right before I went into the, to deliver him, rice and beans. And I just remember there's lots of it. You get quite sick, right?
Yes.
But anyways, so I was 100%. Yeah. During my pregnancy.
So my bigger question, and you know what, I have to let Carrie talk. I tend to over talk all the time. You go ahead.
So did you have any challenges with doctors thinking that you needed animal protein and other things in your diet?
Not during my pregnancy. I actually had a wonderful physician, and he was John Ferger, and he was pretty supportive of what I was doing. In fact, my oldest son, both of my sons were quite large. Stephen both of them were, he was close to 10 pounds, and Nelson was also over 9 pounds. So both of them were large babies, relatively large. And so then, now my oldest son is close to 6'4", and he's been raised 100% on a plant-based diet. And where did he get all his protein from? Those wonderful plants. It's like the gorillas and the giraffes and the elephants, right? And then my other son, my younger son, is also quite large. They were both very physically active in school as well, athletes, and they did quite well. And but I did get a lot of resistance when they were playing sports, and I would have to go in to get their physical signed. And, they always have that question on their physical, are they on any special diet? And when I said, yes, they're, vegan, I would check off the little vegan box. And one time I had this doctor tell me, hey, I'm not, what are you giving them? What kind of supplements? You need to give them additional protein powders, what kind of powders and what kind of supplements? I was like, I don't need to give them anything. They're fine. They're just eating lots of, and then I tried to explain the China study, and he actually refused to sign their physical form until I promised that I would do all these different supplements and stuff. So, but yeah, that was sort of, sometimes there were occasional doctors that with the physical forms, or even coaches that were a little bit worried that they weren't getting enough, protein playing the sports, and because they played different club sports, but we just stuck to our plant-based foods and had no problem.
That's the first time I've heard all the details of that story. I also should add that this is just a proud grandpa, I guess, but both of them are outstanding athletes, playing soccer especially. So it was fun to watch them.
Nice. So they're plant.
Well, he was there the whole time, so I don't know. He just never heard me talk about it.
The doctor, by the way, your physician first, John Ferger, he was a close friend of mine as well. And in fact, when I wrote the China study at that time, the first person to review it was actually John Ferger. I'm gonna do
Ah.
that.
Yeah, so that was my position for Stephen.
Yeah, John.
That
Walker
delivered
Carter.
my oldest
Yeah.
son.
Ah, nice,
Yeah.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
So, question. So, LeAnne, your mom had a regular standard American diet for her pregnancy, and you went through yours whole food, plant-based. Have you two ever like compared notes on what the pregnancies were like, or had any of those kind of conversations?
I think we have, and I think both of my pregnancies, I don't know if because they were such large babies, which, especially Stephen, that I had really long deliveries. And I think her children, they came a little bit quicker. I know that the Tom, the youngest, maybe that's because it was the 5th time, but he just came really fast. But in terms of delivery, I think mine were a little bit longer. At least I wasn't there when she was doing them, but she was there when I had both of my sons.
Uh-huh.
She was in the delivery room and she said that she thought they were a little bit, I mean, both were natural and
Okay.
and it just, yeah.
Yeah.
But the actual pregnancy itself was very similar, I think.
Okay. So no unusual upsets on either side, right? Everybody sailed through pregnancy in the typical ways. Okay, good, 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 good.
Yeah.
And when your kids were born then, and you raised them all plant-based, did you notice, or were there any challenges with like allergies or digestive issues or anything like that?
No, actually, they always had probably close to perfect attendance in school in terms of like not getting sick or anything. They were pretty, yeah, I mean, the allergies, absolutely no allergies. They were both quite healthy in school. So in terms of school lunches, we would always pack a lunch. They didn't buy anything from school lunch. So, but yeah, they were very healthy. Yeah, all the way through.
They still are.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah,
Both of them are really healthy.
very healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because when my younger son Nelson was in kindergarten, they were weighing all the children, and I remember one day I went in to pick him up, and he was maybe 80th percentile in his class for height, but he definitely wasn't, one of the heavier. They're sort of both of them were very stocky boys, but they weren't overweight at all. And I remember when I went in, the teacher in kindergarten asked me, she said, "Wow, Nelson's weighing more than, Johnny and more than, Alfredo." And both of them were a lot larger than Nelson. And so it's interesting. They were all puzzled by, why does he weigh more? And I don't know if it was bone density or his muscles or what, but he was a very, very strong and sort of stocky, but size wise, it was sort of like, it would seem that they should weigh more.
Huh, that's interesting.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know, unless he had rocks in his pants. But
Maybe.
I just remember when I went in, I thought it was interesting that they talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one question, I'm kind of curious. So you both have traveled quite a bit, I'm assuming, and LeAnne, you live in the Dominican Republic. So have you noticed any changes or differences in like preconceptual health or in pregnant women in terms of, do they have any special considerations for foods that they should eat or, consider when they are either trying to become pregnant or while they're pregnant? Anything special that you have seen?
So I just in the Dominican Republic, I think there's a lot of women getting cesareans. That's really big now. I think probably, gosh, almost 80% of them, it seems like, almost everyone's getting cesareans.
Really?
Yeah, that's
Wow.
been that way now for quite a while. And then also in terms of foods to avoid, I know during during the monthly cycle, a lot of women, there's certain fruits that they avoid. It's only there's a certain couple different fruits that they avoid. And
Which fruits?
I'm not quite sure which ones they are, but I know Angelina and yeah, a couple of my friends, they just zapote, fruits that I don't think you know zapotes, but some of the tropical fruits they
Okay.
avoid. But otherwise, that's not necessarily. I haven't seen too many other foods being avoided. The diet has changed tremendously in the Dominican Republic, though. At the same time, it's changed just completely. 30 years ago, when I lived there were a lot more, small gardens in people's homes, and there was less, meat that right now people consume almost 3 times more meat than they used to before. And even oil. It's, before it was a lot more expensive, but now you can get a gallon of corn oil, that it's gone like a family of 4 almost within like a week. We did a little health survey, and they're consuming a lot more oil and a lot more meat and just junk food in general, the Spam, salami, that kind of thing. And before it was a lot more sort of food from, everyone had gardens, and it was much more sort of like local, a lot more local food. So.
Colin, did you see anything similar, like when you were in China or any places you've traveled? Have you noticed that there was particular diets or practices that pregnant women or women seeking pregnancy would take on related to food or other things?
No, I can't say that I got into that territory. I didn't know much about it, so I didn't ask questions.
Okay.
I might make a comment though about the increased consumption of meat in Dominican Republic. I've just so over the time, I've several times, but more recently again, noticed that the so-called epidemiological transition you may have heard about. I followed that very closely. I published a paper in early 1990s actually, because being in the Philippines, being in China, and being in those societies where the diets are very different, and then watching them change. I saw in China, we repeated the China study. We first did it in 1983, did it again in 1989. In that 6-year period, the diets had changed quite dramatically, especially in urban areas. And so there was this desire in those among poor societies, if you will, economically underdeveloped societies, there was an interest that as soon as they got some money, they wanted to eat meat. I mean, that was like the flagship idea that they were aspired to. And I used to have discussions with my Chinese colleagues who were the ones setting the standards for the country. Why are you even recommending higher levels of protein than what we do in the West? And they said, this was in the 1980s. They said, well, because you people in the United States, you eat a lot of protein and you get big and strong and you compete in athletics. They were looking forward to their Olympics at that time. And they said they increased it because they thought that they had to have more protein to be able to compete with the West. So I wanted to make that comment because we have seen transitions in the world. And I looked at the Dominican Republic data actually on that. And sure enough, you see increasing consumption of meat. The biggest increase is in China, especially with the number of people involved. But you see these kind of changes occurring pretty fast. The Westernization of those rural diets.
It also has a lot to do with our trade policies. There's a wonderful book out by Alicia Galvez called Eating NAFTA. And she talks about in Mexico, specifically in rural Mexico, which is almost exactly like in rural Dominican Republic where I live, how, the small farms have basically disappeared. And that's the same thing that's happened in the US. The small farms have disappeared. People have migrated from the rural areas to the urban areas. At least 80% of the people in the area that I live in, 80% of those that used to live in the rural part of the province have now living in the urban areas. So they have sold their small farms. They've sold, the land that they relied on. And these lands, the land has become more and more consolidated. And, the area right beside me now, it's being consolidated by like cattle ranching and just more and more and more. So the trees are coming down, tons of deforestation, and people are eating less and less of, they're buying everything pretty much from the stores. And a lot of that, with, as she talks about in Eating NAFTA, it's the, large food corporations can now get into almost every single little corner of the Dominican Republic. So that you have the sodas, you have the candy bars, you have all the junk food, tons of it there. And you have, you know, a lot of the corn oil, a lot of the products from here that just go down there for like a nickel and a dime that we're not using, especially when we start looking at some of the corn products and some of the sodas. So people have a lot more access to that than they had before. So yeah.
So do you see with that an increase in diabetes and the usuals, right? Diabetes and high blood pressure and all that. It's sort of predictable, right?
Absolutely. So, and as Alicia talks about also in that book, diabetes is now the #1 cause of death in Mexico, right? In the Dominican Republic. What turned me on to this book was actually my son and his wife is actually getting her PhD in food policy. And she's like, oh my gosh, Nelson, I feel like your mom could have written this book because she talks about this all the time. And the one of the theses of the book was that, you know, chronic diet related diseases have just skyrocketed, right? So before, hardly anyone in this area had like diabetes or high cholesterol or even like, you know, obesity. And now in the Dominican Republic, there's young children that are practically being put on meds for high blood pressure, high cholesterol. I mean, but everyone, I mean, that was like non-existent 30 years ago. So the medical situation, the conditions, just like what she documents in her book, I mean, with the crazy increase in all of these types of chronic, like, you know, specifically high blood pressure, high cholesterol, it's in heart disease. It's the same in the Dominican Republic. It's everyone around me pretty much.
Yeah.
We saw that, but that's a story of our times, I think, in many ways. This transition that's occurring. And the fact is, it's changing so fast, remarkably fast. The first time we did the China study, and for example, was 1983. We came back and redid it in 1989, 6 years. We saw average fat intake, which was an indication of the kind of diet in rural China in 1983 was only 14% of calories. By 1989, it had already crept up to 19% for the whole country. And the big cities, it was up to 30%, almost like the West, just in a matter of 6-7 years.
Right.
It was just remarkable. And of course, you know, colon cancer especially started going up and breast cancer and so forth. It was,
same in the DRs, the cancers too that have really skyrocketed.
Yeah. I was just in, not just, it seems like it was just a couple months ago, but I went to Kenya a couple years ago before COVID. And one of the things that I noticed was the same thing you're describing, the influx of processed foods. And of course, there's Kentucky Fried Chicken and Domino's Pizza and all this, you know, in the big cities. Now, the people may not have 2 nickels they can rub together, but they aspire to be able to eat these kinds of foods, right? And in the cities, the people are somewhat chunkier, still not really greatly obese, but somewhat chunkier. And those diseases of affluence, as we call them, right, are creeping up. The people who are in the rural areas, and in Kenya, those are some pretty rural, dusty, you can barely get to them. Driving for days it takes to get to those areas, right? They're not having such a struggle yet. But in the cities, the Cheetos and the Doritos and all of that stuff is definitely having its effect on the population, definitely. Whereas, you know, okay, HIV is bad enough of a scourge to take through a population and kill off people.
Right. So it's become a systemic violence as well, right? So I think a lot of people talk about our personal, if we can only change our personal desires, but we also have to look at the system that's creating that as well, you know, in that area. And specifically some of these like trade policies that are going on, we have to like look at the structure that's there. And if we really want to try to change it, you know, instead of putting a Band-Aid on, we need to really look at it and I think in a deeper way as well. And what can we do to change some of these policies?
Yeah.
So kind of going more into that, what is the relationship between like what the USDA recommends and helps market and how our farmland is managed?
that's a story I've been pretty close to for a long time. and I'm not very fond of what USDA does, to say the least. But they started their dietary recommendations, guidelines, they called it, in 1980. In fact, the first dietary guidelines was written by two friends of mine, one from FDA, the other from USDA, in an office right next to mine when I was on sabbatic. And so I've seen it from the very beginning. At the beginning, it was those two guys are very high-minded and fair and honest. There's no question about it. But I have seen the transition over time in that whole program. They report it every 5 years. It's disgusting, to say the least. It's very, very annoying. I sort of take it personally in a sense, because I was on some of those committees too, and I know the people involved, and I've seen it firsthand. You know how the whole operation is basically at the end of the day is controlled. It's controlled by basically industry, because the USDA, for example, the Secretary of Agriculture, who organizes this committee in collaboration, I should say, with Health and Human Services, but they organized this effort at the time, but USDA pretty much runs it. And so the scientific community convenes, a new committee, it convenes every 5 years to do the next 5-year round. And they will sit down and, you know, try to be reasonably honest, obviously, about what they're seeing in the science. But it's always the same thing, because at the end of the time, even though they allowed for public comment, at the end of that 5-year period, the one who has the final say is the secretary, who usually it just has come from the Cattlemen's Association or the Dairy Council or something like that. And they have the final say. And so, you know, and we have a language that's rich in adjectives. And I can tell you, we all can start with the same basic facts, but when we describe those facts, you know, with adjectives, we can just get two different answers for the public. That's the whole game of policy. And so, you know, and in turn, the politicians control who's going to be the secretaries, you know, in the voting booth. And, you know, if one party's in, they're going to make sure their people is in but I have to say both the left and right, you know, participate in the same silly game. And it's really people at the top making final decisions. And the final decisions are very much, they're watchdogs for the livestock industry throughout. It's just that way. That's the way it is. And I wish, yeah, a lot of probably don't see how serious this is. And it's not, I don't know, I could talk all day long about this here, but it's very, very annoying. And it's very difficult to make progress. I wrote an article just mentioned 2015, I guess it was. The guidelines were coming out at that time. And so they asked for public comment. And that year there was 29,000 comments. I remember the number went way up. And I was one of them. And mine was selected and published on the front page by The Hill, you know, that magazine in Washington. So it got quite a lot of play. And so what I was basically saying, hey, you know, you didn't mention anything. I actually mentioned Esselstyn's work. You know, they were talking about heart disease, future heart disease, and they did not even acknowledge it even existed. That's right, they didn't exist. Now, and it went to the front page of that paper. Did it get in the chat? And when they came back and sort of had a chance to edit the final copy, did they edit it? No. It just didn't, it just got ignored. That's really what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's kind of worldwide. So going back to what you were saying, LeAnne, I'm going to see if I can tie this together. And am I leaping too far in making this leap here? So what happens in the US definitely influences, let's say, what happens dang near everywhere else in the world, right? For better and for worse.
Absolutely. I think it's the sort of the corporate, it's
Yeah.
profit driven, right?
Yeah.
We're looking for more and more markets.
Yeah.
So let's expand these markets into other parts of the globe. So that's
right. And it absolutely, my opinion, and maybe you agree, does not appear to matter how it impacts the health of the people, not the animals, not the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It is all about expanding into other markets. Maybe I was going to say maybe profit, maybe power. Wow.
Yeah, that Cattlemen's Association, they want to expand those markets, that dairy. And, you know, so I mean, our whole food system is pretty much run almost by 5 different corporations, right? And they are trying to reach into as many markets as they can. And so that is, we definitely see that in the Dominican Republic. And I think, even the idea that he mentioned, that idea that animal protein is the highest quality protein that you need, right? And so in the Dominican Republic, before even 20 years ago, I don't think people worried as much as trying to get as much animal protein. And so that's really also being taught. And they hear that all the time, that they need, animal protein. And children from a very young age, they need to eat a lot of meat because they'll be healthier. It's meat and milk. And so, and then as a result, I mean, it's what we're seeing on an environmental level is actually terrifying. I mean, in terms of the amount of deforestation that has happened in just this one small province where I live, thousands and thousands of acres have just been clear cut. And for cattle, creating more pasture land for cattle. Rivers have dried up, just areas where we would go and we would swim in the waterfalls just 30 years ago are pretty much gone. The land has become more, overheated, and there's less that can grow in the land as well. And as a result too, I mean, you study that rain cycle, there's less rain. And so, and it comes back to that also, that whole, it's connected to that desire too, to have more meat, that animal protein,
It's remarkable too. So we're kind of focused on children's nutrition, and what we see in the schools, as of course is controlled by what the USDA says goes into the schools. And that is something that's so entrenched. It's just, wow, impossible to budge.
Wow.
That is a good point. That's a very good point.
But Meryl, we're actually looking at that topic carefully too, because we want to do 2 of the workshops for this upcoming year for the Plant Forward series, focused specifically on schools and the school lunch program. And I just recently got a book. I have to, food for thought. I can send you the title.
Yes, do.
Where, historically, in the school lunch program, they actually had school gardens, and they did certain canning and preservation, and the school lunch ladies were there nurturing the students. But now again, it's being run by, this large like food sort of Amtrak, which I believe is in most schools, right? And it's like these packaged little lunches, boom, and it really, the school lunch lady too is sort of being kicked out. We didn't need less and less of this, and just these no school gardens. It's become so much more. It's a prepackaged sort of USDA almost.
These are Amtrak books.
Yeah, is it Amtrak? What is the name of that large?
There are a couple up here. We see like Sodesco, and maybe I don't remember the other one is, but that's a big one. And just what you're saying, they're bringing in totally prepackaged meals. And since the pandemic, I think it's a federal program because everybody I talk to says the same thing. They're providing free lunch and free breakfast, and it's all prepackaged stuff. Yeah, not really appetizing or healthy at all.
I actually have that book right beside my bed. Meryl, do you want me to run and get it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I might just, while she's doing that, I might just also mention this enthusiasm for animal protein. Actually, the dietary guidelines were revised, I should say, in 2002.
Yep.
And they introduced the new concept of how to make recommendations. And the concept was that they were going to set an upper safe limit for all the different nutrients, right? And the amount of protein we need is around, that we only need is around 8-10%.
Right.
But the average for the population runs from around 11 to 22.
Right.
The average runs 17, 16, 17, something like that. Well, anyhow, in 2002, the organization, the agency that changed that, the upper safe limit is 35%.
For protein?
Yes, and the committee who did that did not, in fact, actually justify it. That came about because in the preparation, once that report was done, and then it was released in the newspapers and in the New York Times and every place else, It happened in the news release that was prepared without consultation with the committee.
Wow.
And the director of that operation actually was the director of our division at Cornell. He's the one that took my course out of the catalog, and it's the reason that CNS exists. I know this firsthand.
Wow.
And he was the one that actually engineered that. And at the same time he was involved in that, and just he and a few others, he moved over to the dietary guidelines, was chairman of that committee at the time too. And he sort of, it was the recommendation formulated over here at 35%, then transferred over to here to change the dietary guidelines for the school lunch program. So the school lunch program now has to live under this sort of very high-minded upper limit.
Goodness.
We can't even get to 35% if we eat milk, meat, and eggs all day hardly.
Oh my goodness.
So it should, they just remove the limit. There's no, the sky's the limit.
Mm,
So what that does, it enables now agencies to go out and school lunch programs, for example, to go out and argue, oh yeah, with the guidelines say we can go up to, I mean, you could get the point. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did that occur, Colin?
Now, 2002, it was actually they're supposed to report every 5 years. That was the 2000 report, but it was actually released in 2002. Not sure why it was 2 years late, but in any case, it came over late. And yeah, that's what it was.
Wow.
Here's the book, Meryl and Carrie. It's called The Labor of Lunch. The Labor of Lunch, Why We Need Real Food and Real Jobs in American Public Schools by
Nice.
Jennifer Gaddis.
What's it? What is it?
No, she's looking at it more
Oh,
from
okay.
the sort of the policies and,
Interesting.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That'll be the next book I read. Right. Maybe at the same time as I read Eating NAFTA. I'm not sure. That's great. Right. Well, let's see if there's anything else we need to ask you. We've been talking already for an hour, and I so appreciate your time. I just love this. Such an honor.
So I guess one other question that I have, is there one thing that you could recommend what any of our viewers do or start doing today? One thing in particular that they could start?
In terms of related to school lunch, or
Just nutrition in general.
I'm gonna let this one answer.
Well, you know, one of the big things, big ticket items that I've talked about for some time, there's not a medical school in the United States that teaches nutrition. And if they do offer any nutrition information, it's the wrong kind of nutrition information. So, you know, unfortunately, the public looks to these professionals, you know, as being authorities. They're not trained in this area. So that's number one. And number two, that can be controlled. I know the medical schools rely on federal assistance for all sorts of things. And they could easily say, look, unless you teach a course of nutrition, we're not going to give you more money. I mean, they've used that tactic before. There's certain strings attached, you know, that's part of the curriculum, and the fact that it's missing. That's one thing. The second thing is that doctors are not compensated. They're not reimbursed properly for teaching this kind of or telling this kind of information to their patients. Meryl, I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
They just can't get that kind of compensation, which in turn is tied to the medical specialty idea. There's 130 different medical specialties, this, that, and everything else. There's not one called nutrition.
Yeah.
So they can't put a number down, you know, when they're recording what they did. They can't put a number down to reflect, you know, telling people about nutrition. So compensation is another thing that would cause changes. And then other big things too is just, I don't know, from the public level, what we're doing with CNS, what you're involved in helping us do, Meryl.
Yes.
You know, the CNS whole thing, developing an education program that is accessible, you know, to the public, but at the same time is scientifically reliable, is what we like to say. And that kind of thing. And the plant, what LeAnne brought to the whole thing, this idea of, I'm excited about it, this idea of the plant forward kind of movement.
Yes.
Our horizons. I love that idea. And I think it's gotten a good start. So what the heck? I mean, when people would talk about this in very substantive ways, that's one way to kind of get out there.
Yeah, if I can say one thing too, it's know where your food comes from, right?
Yeah.
And know not only what it's doing to us, but also know where it's coming from. I think, there's a whole side of our entire food system too. I mean, all of his research and his work really highlights the impact on our personal health. But also when we start looking at GMOs, when we start looking at how food is being produced and these kind of monoculture, with the pesticides and then the loss of species diversity and biodiversity. I mean, we see that too in the Dominican Republic, like crazy, the loss of the pollinators. And just know where your food comes from. Sort of like it's such an invisible thing. We just go to the store and we get everything we need and we think, oh, this is good for me, this is healthy for me. But sometimes if you look at some of those healthy foods, perhaps, and if they're in, wow, this is organic, comparing organic to non-organic, and just knowing where your food comes from and trying to and stay educated about it, and try to, because our food has a tremendous impact. I think one of the greatest impacts our food system has on the environment right now than practically anything else. That's what I have seen in the Dominican Republic. It's one of the number one drivers for eco destruction that is going on, not just in the Dominican Republic, but I can go through I've traveled throughout the Americas extensively, and it's probably the number one cause for loss of forest and loss of biodiversity, and just the pesticides that are being now used and pumped into these countries. Bayer is right there, Monsanto's right there, and just pumping in these pesticides too. It's just the chemicals in the waterways and everything. All that is also pretty astounding. And when you talk about healthy, good food, healthy soil. If you have healthy soil, that the food is also like almost 100 times more nutrients, I think, up to 100 times more, and it's healthier, healthier for us as well. So it's that holistic approach too.
Yeah, one more specific item when you asked me before what to do. I think the public should be encouraged to use farmers markets. Yeah, we should be supporting farmers markets as much as we can, personally, privately, publicly. Because those folks are usually bringing in their food from their own personal farms.
Yeah,
usually grown, and oftentimes I think in pretty organic conditions.
That's knowing you know where it's come from.
Right. That's beautiful. That is so powerful what you both just said. Amazing. You know what? I do want to ask one more thing before we sign off. I want to know just a little bit about the Plant Forward series. Tell us what's going on with that.
Thank you, Meryl. So we have this, we're in the process right now of trying to determine the community platform that we want to use, because we've already given out almost 54 small micro grants to community groups around the world, and that are focusing on providing community education, food literacy around a whole food plant-based diet, as well as increasing access to healthy, affordable food and promoting sustainable and equitable food systems. And so we have all these wonderful groups and doing amazing work. We're bringing them together to have them help us with this workshop series, which is really all about how do we do this in our communities, right? And there's gazillions of ways you can do it. It's inspiring. But then we're also contextualizing their work, with an expert too, that can sort of broaden and really make it so that their work is understood a little bit better. So this upcoming year, we have a workshop every first Wednesday of every month. We are going to have a workshop focused specifically on, what people can do in their communities, as well, also providing them with the tools to go out into their communities. I mean, one of the first workshops we actually want to focus on is protein, the myth of animal protein, all the data behind it, and then the arguments that one can carry and forth as they share this with others, and then the questions we're most likely asked. Because I mean, we can look at even the droughts in Kenya. We can look at some of these things going on around the world too. I mean, a lot of it comes down to, and people trying so hard to hang on to their herds, and hang on to their cattle, and hey, maybe we should start going into food forest, right? So we have a lot of interesting, fun workshops coming up. Like I said, 2 of them will be focused on our school system and projects that one can do with our schools, community gardens. And then we actually have even a couple workshops focused on, we'll have one focused on funding. How can these groups sustain their initiatives and their programs and all the wonderful ways that they can, try to raise funds to support it. And just planning. So we have lots of different things focused all on those 3 topics. So
is this Plant Forward project, is it available for anyone to participate?
absolutely. And so we're basically providing all these workshops, but we're also using it as as a way to sustain our community grants. So we have we're going to have a monthly workshop, and then we have, networking opportunities for people to come on and connect with others who are trying to do the same work in other parts of, the US or around the world. And so we have, we're trying to get, strong, facilitators of those groups who have a lot of expertise and experience in that area that can also provide lots of resources. And we're putting together lots of resources. So we'll have this community sort of setting going on where we can share and learn from each other and gather resources. But then we have the monthly workshop, and we're going to have all of our past workshops available. And we're going to ask people, a monthly, I think it's going to be maybe $20 a month to get onto the community, but all of that's going straight into our community grants program. So we can continue to provide the funds. And hopefully, I know he's also going to maybe help sort of try to help do a little bit of fundraising beyond, the community grant, if we can go out and we'll see. That's right.
That's great.
We do have a history that we can rely on and a lot of success, I think. And so our story, I think, is very, very strong.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this, Merle. I mean, the transformative power of food, not only to heal ourselves, but if it's grown in a sustainable and equitable way, it can also heal our communities, right? So I think it's the whole picture of and it is transformative. And so, we need to really, I think, put time and thought and energy into trying to do this more. So that's what we're trying to do with Plant Forward. So,
that's the best. I love that. So what I didn't say at the beginning of this is that I have the privilege and honor of being on the board of directors for the Center for Nutrition Studies. I can't tell you what kind of a high point it is in my day to spend any time working with the nutrition, the Center for Nutrition Studies. It's just it's so fulfilling. It is really wonderful. And to get to know you too this way is just, I don't know, a great Christmas present. Wonderful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I feel like we should let you go and have your afternoon back and enjoy your time with your family. It must be building as we are in Christmas season here.
Yeah.
Is there a particular way that people should find you if they want to track you in social media or learn more about what you're doing? And we'll make sure that we put that in the notes for this show.
Sure. I think just the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies.
Okay.
And I, everyone's email, I don't even think we have our emails. It's our first initial and last name at Nutrition Studies.
No, that's
so
okay.
It's L. Campbell at Nutrition Studies. And then I think, everyone's the first initial, last name at Nutrition Studies.
Okay.
I've never done a Facebook thing.
Yeah.
I never did a Twitter thing.
So
I never
you
did
don't have to.
Those numbers. So I'm not into that world.
Okay.
That's okay. You don't have to. We got you covered.
Let others do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both again
thank
very
you so
much.
much.
We love you, love you, love you. You have impacted millions of people around the world
Well,
in
thank you.
the best way.
Well, you're doing exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done, organizing conversations. Nothing like conversations.
That's right.
Nothing
That's
like
right.
conversations.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
Keep
appreciate
it
it.
up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh
It's
my
such an
gosh.
honor to have you both here.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
thank
Well, have
you.
a wonderful holiday.
Yes, you too. You too. Bye-bye.
6 Million Seeds is made possible by the generosity of Bruno Chiropractic, Acme Construction Metals, eXp Realty, and Deck It Out Builders. Thank you for your support.